Take a second and think about your last name. Say it out loud. Feel the weight of it. It feels like it belongs to you, doesn't it? It feels ancient. Personal. It's a link in a chain stretching back through time, connecting you to ancestors you've never met, to places you may have never seen. It's your tribe, your legacy, your story. But what if I told you that feeling is mostly an illusion? What if your last name isn't really yours? That it doesn't belong to your family in the way you think it does? What if it was actually invented? Not by your great-great-grandparents around a fire, but as a piece of technology. An administrative tool, designed and assigned by a clerk with a dusty ledger, a king with an army to raise, or a state that desperately needed to find you, to tax you, and to control you. This isn't a conspiracy theory. This is the hidden history of how we, all of us, became legible to power. To understand how this global rewiring of identity happened, we need to travel. We need to go to a small, cold room in Japan, in the year 1875. The 8th year of a new, nervous era called Meiji. Push open the paper screen door. The air inside is thick with the smells of old wood, rice paste, damp winter wool, and the faint, briny tang of the nearby sea. In the center of the room, there's a low lacquered desk. And on that desk, a brand new book. But look closer. This isn't just a book. This is an artifact of a revolution. The paper is washi, handmade from mulberry fibers. If you could run your thumb over it, you'd feel those tiny fibers lifting like soft, pale whiskers. It's almost a living thing. The ink sitting in a stone pot beside it is iron gall. When it's first brushed onto the page, it's a deep, satisfying bluish-black. But it's acidic. Over the next 100 years, it will slowly eat into the paper, browning at the edges, leaving a faint, rusty halo around each stroke, a ghost of the moment it was written. And next to the ink, a small porcelain pot holding a flash of brilliant, impossible red. That's vermilion cinnabar mixed into a thick paste. It's for the Henko seal, the personal stamp that serves as a signature. When the time comes, that seal will be pressed into the red paste and then slammed down onto the page with a wet, final, satisfying thud of authority. It's a bite mark left by bureaucracy. This book is a new household register. It is called the Koseki. A man is standing at that desk. He is a fisherman. Let's call him Kenji. His feet are bare on the tatami mats, his soles cracked and permanently salted from the sea. His fingernails are blackened with boat tar that will never wash out. His cotton sleeves are tied back to keep them out of the way. He's nervous. He has probably never been in a government office like this before. The scribe, a city man in a formal kimono, a man Kenji has never met, asks him a question he has never been asked before. What is your surname? Your family name? And Kenji is silent. He has no idea what to say. For his entire life, he's been Kenji. Or Kenji, the son of Haruto. Or the man from the house by the docks. In his village, that was more than enough. Everyone knew who he was. But it's not enough anymore. The new Meiji government, in a frantic rush to modernize and stand up to the Western powers, is building a modern state from scratch. And a modern state needs a modern army, a modern tax system, and a modern school system. To do any of that, it needs to know who its citizens are. It needs a list. And to make a list, you need a stable, unique identifier. You need a family name. The scribe is waiting. The brush is poised. The fisherman, feeling the pressure, looks out the window, past the harbor boats bobbing on the gray water, to a forested mountain ridge he has seen every single day of his life. He says the first thing that comes into his head. The name of that place. Yamazaki. Mountain Cape. The scribe's brush, made of fine horsehair, dips into the ink and moves with a wet, silent hush. Two characters flow onto the page. Yamazaki. The seal drops, biting the page with its red ink. And in that instant, a glance out a window, a private landmark, hardens into public infrastructure. It becomes a line item. It becomes a file. A name that will be passed down for generations, a name that may even be carried by someone listening to this right now. So let me ask you again, who authored your last name? A loving ancestor who founded a family? Or an impatient official who just needed to fill a column in a ledger? This is the story of the day we were all inventoried. The day we became searchable. This technology, the surname, is deceptively simple. It's an algorithm made of 3 ingredients: paper plus ink plus a registry. That's all it takes to turn a fluid, messy human life into a neat, searchable data point. And while that moment in Japan in 1875 feels so specific, it's just one chapter in a global story that had been unfolding for centuries. A story that begins, for our purposes, in the Kingdom of France. The year is 1539. King Francis I sits on the throne. His kingdom is a chaotic, medieval patchwork of regions and customs. Imagine you're a royal administrator. The king needs money. He needs soldiers. So you send your men out to count the people. but it's impossible. In Normandy, a local priest writes down a child's baptismal record in Latin, maybe with a note in Norman French. Down south, in Provence, a priest uses the local Occitan language. The spellings are wild. Names change constantly. A man named Jacques might be known as Jacques Le Grand in his village because he's tall. 10 miles down the road, where they don't know him, he might just be Jacques, son of Pierre. His identity is local and fluid. For the king, trying to govern a whole nation, this is chaos. It's like trying to count fog. So he issues a decree, a sweeping legal document called the Ordinance of Villers-Cotterets. It's hundreds of clauses long, dealing with all sorts of legal matters. But buried inside it is one clause that will change the nature of Western identity forever. It orders that from now on, all parish registers, every baptism, every marriage, every burial, must be recorded, by law, in the king's official Parisian French. No more Latin, no more local dialects. And even more crucially, it standardizes the use of surnames. A child's name and their father's name must be recorded. That family name stops being a suggestion. It settles like sediment in a river. A priest can no longer just write what he hears. He has to check the register. Is this Jean Lefort, Jean the Strong? Or is he the son of Jacques Lefort? The name is now tethered to a previous entry in a book. It's the very beginning of a paper trail. An identity that lives outside of your own body, in an archive, written in a single tongue, controlled by a single state. It sounds like a simple bit of housekeeping, but it's a revolutionary shift in power. The state, not the village, is now the ultimate arbiter of who you are. But what happens when this powerful new technology is used not just to organize, but to dominate, to control, and to shame? For that, we have to travel east, to the sprawling Habsburg lands, in the year 1787. The Enlightenment is in full swing. Rulers across Europe are trying to create more rational and efficient states. As part of this, the emperor issues a decree called the Namenspatent. It's aimed directly at the empire's Jewish subjects. It commands them, by law, to discard their traditional Hebrew patronymics, names like David ben Abraham, David, son of Abraham, and adopt permanent, hereditary, German surnames. This isn't just about record keeping, it's a powerful tool of forced assimilation. The state is saying, to be a citizen of this empire, you must have a name that we can easily pronounce, spell, and file. Now, try to imagine the scene. A dreary provincial office, maybe in Galicia or Bohemia. A clerk, likely bored and underpaid, sits behind a desk piled high with forms printed in stark, spiky, black-letter German script. A candle sputters nearby, a stick of red sealing wax melting beside it. Jewish families, who for centuries had a rich and meaningful naming tradition, are now forced to line up and essentially choose a new identity off a government-approved list. Or worse, have one assigned to them. And here, the bureaucracy gets cruel. The system was engineered for corruption and humiliation. Historians who have studied these original ledgers have discovered a clear pattern. If you had money, if you could afford to slip the clerk a few coins, you could buy a beautiful name. A poetic one. Blum for flower. Goldstein for Goldstone. Rosenberg for Rose Mountain. Spielberg for Play Mountain. You could literally purchase a more dignified, more pleasant-sounding identity for your family for all of posterity. But if you were poor, or if you were defiant, or if the clerk was simply in a foul mood that day, you were branded. You were assigned a name that was a public insult, a joke that would bite your descendants for generations. The clerks had a whole repertoire of nasty tricks. They assigned names based on negative physical traits, Klein for small, Weisbart for whitebeard. They used unpleasant occupations, Bettelman, meaning beggar. They even used insulting animal names, Essel, meaning donkey. They could brand a family with a name that marked them as other, as lesser than, forever. In this moment, the surname wasn't a piece of heritage. It was a weapon. It was a verdict delivered by a petty bureaucrat on a family's worth. This impulse for legibility, for turning messy human populations into neat columns of names, became an obsession across Europe. It was the age of empires and mass armies, and empires need paperwork to function. And no one understood the power of paperwork better than Napoleon Bonaparte. As his armies marched across the continent, they brought with them not just cannons and bayonets, but also rational legal codes and brutally efficient administrative systems. In 1811, his forces occupy the Netherlands. One of the first things the new administration does is institute a policy called naamsennaming, literally, name adoption. The decree is simple. Every family in the country that does not have a fixed surname must go to their local civic office, declare a permanent name, and register it immediately. This creates a fascinating historical moment. An entire nation queuing up to name itself. For the first time, a complete, centralized record of the whole Dutch population begins to form. And this system was so robust, so thorough, that any genealogist today can still pull those exact records from 1811 and follow that paper trail, fingertip by fingertip, from a modern Dutch citizen all the way back to the precise day their ancestors stood in line and chose a name. Maybe they picked their profession, de Bakker, the baker, or where they lived, Van Dam, from the town of Dam. There's a persistent myth, probably not entirely true, but it reveals a truth about the mood that many Dutch people, viewing the French occupation as temporary, chose deliberately silly or rude names as a form of protest. Names like Nachtgeboren, born naked. The joke, of course, was on them. Napoleon's empire fell, but the efficient administrative state he built, and the names it recorded, remained. Their protest became their permanent address. Now let's see the system deployed at an even more massive, almost industrial scale. Let's go halfway around the world to the Philippines in 1849. The islands have been under Spanish rule for almost 300 years, and the colonial governor, Narciso Claveria, has a huge administrative problem. The Filipino population is impossible to tax effectively. Their naming conventions are inconsistent. Many indigenous people have no surname at all. Trying to keep track of births, deaths, and debts is a logistical nightmare. So he devises a solution that is both ingenious and culturally devastating. He commissions a book, the Catalogo Alfabetico de Apellidos, the alphabetical catalog of surnames. It is exactly what it sounds like. A giant book, a dictionary of thousands of names, mostly Spanish in origin, but also including indigenous and even Chinese words, printed in Manila. And this book, this catalog, is sent to every single provincial governor and parish priest. It lands on their desks like a grid net about to be cast over the entire archipelago. The instructions that came with the catalog were terrifyingly simple. Hand these names out. Assign them. Now imagine you're a local Filipino official, a cabeza de barangay, in a small village. A Spanish functionary gives you a list of names, say, from page 127 of the catalog. You are ordered to assign them to every family in your village. You literally go down the list. First family, you are now Mercado. Next family, you are now Morales. Next Moreno. Family by family. The result was surreal. Entire towns, entire communities might end up with surnames all starting with the same letter. If you travel in the Philippines today, you can still see these clusters. It had nothing to do with ancestry or choice or identity. It was a purely administrative act, designed to make the population legible to the colonial state. It was a second conquest, not with swords, but with ink. An act of turning a complex oral culture into a simple, searchable spreadsheet by candlelight. A spreadsheet that would make it infinitely easier to collect taxes, conscript soldiers, and control a colonized people. And today, those names, assigned from a book over 170 years ago, fill passports, social media profiles, and school rosters across the Philippines and its global diaspora. This global hardening of names took different forms everywhere, like a liquid crystallizing under pressure. In Scandinavia, the ancient system of patronymics, where a son's last name was his father's first name, plus son or sin, was deliberately frozen in place. In Denmark in 1828, then Sweden in 1901, and Norway in 1923, the flowing river of names was turned to ice. Eric's son, who for centuries would have been called Eriksson, no longer has a son called, say, John Eriksson. No, the name Eriksson becomes permanent. A snapshot becomes an eternal label. Only the stubborn island nation of Iceland, to this day, keeps the old river unfrozen, a living exception to Europe's administrative ice age, where names still tell you who someone's father or even mother is. Even brand new nations, forged in the fires of the 20th century, used this technology to build a new identity from scratch. Look at the Republic of Turkey in 1934. In the ashes of the Ottoman Empire, its founder, Mustafa Kemal, wants to build a modern, secular, Western-style nation. To do this, he felt he had to erase the Ottoman past. A key part of this was passing the Soyadi Kanunu, the surname law. This law mandated that all citizens adopt a formal, hereditary Turkish surname. The government then poured a wave of new, officially approved Turkish surnames across the entire nation, replacing the old system of titles and honorifics. And the nation's founder himself was granted a new surname by the parliament, Ataturk, father of the Turks. The state itself becomes the author of identity, curating a chorus of new labels and asking the entire nation to sing in unison, in a new language of belonging. Now, all of this sounds very public, very top-down. Kings and emperors, governors and clerks. But all this time, a second, parallel technology of naming was running beneath the surface. A private technology. The technology of love and marriage and, most importantly, property. Under the legal doctrine of coverture, which dominated law in much of Europe and America for centuries, when a woman married, her legal identity was subsumed into her husband's. She ceased, in the cold eyes of the law, to be a separate person. She could not own property in her own right, sign contracts, or sue someone. She became a femme covert, a covered woman. And the most visible public symbol of this legal absorption was the surname. A woman taking her husband's name wasn't just a romantic tradition, it was the public performance of a legal fact. It was the stitch that bound a private intimacy to public land titles, to the inheritance of wealth, and to the legal legitimacy of children. The marriage certificate becomes the hinge where a sacred vow is transformed into cold, hard paperwork. The family name becomes a brand, a corporate entity, a container for wealth and status that could be reliably passed down through a male line. The surname becomes a joint venture between state power and family affection, stabilized and made official by that crucial piece of paper. When you really step back and look at it, this whole system is built on physical things. The material culture of identity is the skeleton key to understanding all of this. It's in the feel of that rag paper, with its distinct watermarks you can see when you hold it up to the light. It's in the chemical reaction of the iron gall ink, with its corrosive brown halos that bloom around the letters over time. It's in the technological shift from clumsy, hand-carved woodblock forms to the crisp, elegant, infinitely repeatable lines of copperplate printing. It's in the Henko seals that physically bite the page, leaving their indelible mark. We like to think a person is made of flesh and blood, of memories and spirit. But for the last 500 years, in the eyes of the systems that govern us, a person has been made of fibers and rules and ink. And the stakes here have always been deeply, profoundly human. It's a constant, unresolved tug-of-war. The desire for belonging versus the reality of surveillance. The deep human need for dignity versus the derision of an imposed, insulting label. The comfort of family continuity versus the pain of being categorized and controlled. A name can open a door to a new life, a new job, a new country. Or it can paint a target on your back. It can put you on a list you never wanted to be on. A clear pattern finally emerges from all this history, rising from the paper like invisible ink held over a flame. When states get bigger and need to scale their power, names harden. When families want to create a legacy and seek continuity across generations, names sweeten. And when those two immense forces, state power and family love, meet, they are stabilized and locked into place by paperwork. Our identity isn't something we magically discover, hiding deep inside of us. For the past half-millennium, it's something that has been engineered. Engineered by clerks who just needed clean columns for their tax rolls. By couples who wanted a secure future for their children. By courts that demanded a defendant who couldn't just vanish by changing his name. We don't just inherit a sound from our ancestors. We inherit a filing system. And incredibly, you, right now, still rehearse this ancient ritual every single day. Every time you sign for a package with a stylus on a screen, every time you tap your digital signature to agree to terms and services you haven't read, you're reenacting the same fundamental steps as that fisherman in 1875. You declare your identity, the system stamps it with approval, and you officially, legally, belong to the transaction. Of course, today's ledger extends infinitely further than parchment and ink. The underlying logic is precisely the same, but the technology has evolved into something our ancestors couldn't have imagined. Your national ID card, your social security number, your passport, your credit file. These are the modern koseki. Your surname is still the first gate you pass through on every online form, the first thing they ask for. But the true key to your modern identity, the thing that makes you uniquely searchable in a world of 8 billion people, is the number that comes after it. That string of digits is the ultimate evolution of the same logic born in that French ordinance of 1539 to make every single person on the planet perfectly legible, perfectly trackable, perfectly sortable. And love? Love is still desperately negotiating with the registry. Modern couples have long, hard conversations over hyphenations, blended names, or whether to keep separate names at all. Every choice, every attempt to break from the patriarchal tradition requires a mountain of fresh paperwork, a dozen databases to be painstakingly updated, a new household bargaining with digital columns on a web form that still prefer a single, simple, uncomplicated entry. But now, there are new, invisible fingerprints all over our identity. The autocomplete on your phone that learns to guess your name, and sometimes gets it wrong in revealing ways. The airport watch lists that can flag you for having a name similar to someone else's, derailing your life based on a statistical resemblance. The background checks that trail you for your entire life, a digital ghost of every address you've ever had and every job you've ever held, longer and more accurately than any human memory. And most terrifyingly, the data brokers who buy and sell your history, your name, your purchases, your movements, like they were bound volumes of old books. The ancient promise of legibility now runs on servers that never, ever forget. For all practical purposes, you now exist as a record first, and as a recollection second. Your data double, the version of you that exists on those servers, often has more power over your life, your ability to get a loan, a job, or even cross a border than you do. The Koseki page, that beautiful piece of handmade washi in that cold room in 1875, has dissolved and reformed into the glowing sign-up form on the device in your hands right now. The cursor blinks, patiently, rhythmically, in exactly the spot where the scribe's ink-filled brush once paused, waiting for an answer. We are all of us, still living in that charged space between ink and approval, between who we feel we are and who the system requires us to be. So, what's the final verdict in this long investigation? A surname is a truce. A fragile, centuries-old truce, hammered out between the human heart and the bureaucratic ledger. Hold that idea up to the light of the present day, and you can see its long shadow everywhere, at every login screen, every checkout counter, every security checkpoint. In every one of those places, our private tenderness and the state's public authority are still trying, awkwardly and often unsuccessfully, to share the same single line. The story of your name is the story of how you were first written down. But that story, the invention of your paper identity, isn't over. In fact, that piece of paper was just the beginning. The next chapter, the one that truly defines our lives today, is the story of the number that follows your name, the one that actually runs our digital world. To see how that powerful technology came to be, you need to click the video on your screen right now. It is the essential next piece of this investigation. And before you go, one last question for the archives. What's the story of your name? Not the grand, historical version we've been talking about, but your personal one. Is there a meaning? A country of origin? A story your parents told you about why they chose it? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one, and I'm fascinated to see the incredible archive we can build together right here. And if you love digging into the hidden systems that secretly shape our world, subscribe and hit that bell. We open a new file from the archives of humanity every single day, and you do not want to miss what we uncover next.